He's got to be, I think the
Oh,
letter.
there he is, on air.
Good evening. And welcome to the July 12th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission. Tonight, we're going to have to continue our public hearing from June 21st on the Old Town Subarea Plan. As usual, the first order of business is the approval of minutes from June 28th.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from June 28, 2018.
Second the motion.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. So I guess Trish,
You might want to introduce our newest member, Jason.
so Jason, welcome.
Thank you.
Jason, how do you pronounce your last name?
Voice.
Boyce
Correct.
is a new member that hasn't been able to attend meetings in June, so welcome.
Thank you.
And I know you will be as involved and knowledgeable as our other new members that are sitting at the table, so welcome.
Thank you.
So with that,
Yep.
Trish is going to give us Kristen is going to give us an update on the Old Town Plan.
Okay, so, let's see. Just trying to think back. I didn't put a date on here this time of when the public hearing, we first brought it back. And I can't, it was May or June, believe it was May 10th? No, somewhere around there. June 14th, there we go. And it's been continued a couple of times. Once we took a look at boundaries, one time we talked about formula businesses, and then most recently, we had some administrative changes that came up and after additional review, and so that is what we were going to look at tonight. And we will also make a final decision on boundaries, and then hopefully tonight there will be a recommendation to the City Council. So this is a list of, I'm going to go over these a little more clearly, but a list of changes that was made, that have been made since June 21st, the last time that you all saw this. They're in quality of life, vision, and then the policies as well, all the way down, and then also into the action programs. So starting with quality of life, there is an expansion of the section, just for clarification purposes. First, we noted that it predates suburban or car-oriented form of the rest of the city. So it's intended to be more
Kristen, can I interrupt for just 1 second? Are all of these updates in the version
They
that
are.
we received? Okay, that was the version that they had kind of done that update
Yes.
on, right? Okay,
So all
great.
of these are in your packet, and all of these are on the website as well. We added that it came up in the strategic plan, some of the stuff that has popped up in that it came up about 3 or 4 times that Old Town has a tight-knit feel. So let's put that in there as well. We added that there's been abusive parking, particularly near transit stops. And by abusive parking, I mean parking somewhere in front of a shop all day and staying there all day so that, people couldn't get to stores. Development codes, we added specifically impervious and parking, just to clarify, connection to Issaquah Creek wasn't prioritized, and a loss of neighborhood serving retail. I believe it said loss of a grocery store, and we just broadened that to say some neighborhood serving businesses.
Kristen,
Yes.
the tight-knit fill that you have in the plan, the next word is small town charm. And I'm not sure if, it's just my opinion, but I don't like small town.
Okay.
And you don't have to change it. I just don't consider Issaquah a small town anymore.
But the Old
Charm,
Town,
I
but Old Town,
understand.
does Old Town have the small Old Town charm?
It's just my opinion.
Okay.
Nobody else seems to care, so it's just my opinion.
It's on the record now.
Okay.
Okay. And the vision, it was just rearranged a little bit. We added a piece about the prominence of views of the mountains and how important it is to keep those, and changed heart of the city to historic downtown. Didn't want to offend anybody. All right. In community, we added 1.8, facilitate active use of sidewalks by area businesses. And we have a section in our code that allows it allows it to happen, expedites, there we go, expedites the process for businesses and adds areas to it. So Issaquah Highlands is included, I think Rowley might be included in it, and then add Old Town to help expedite serving restaurants, having restaurants serve food or flowers outside or whatever it is. And then remove specifics regarding on how to update the standards, stating only that we want to remain consistent with the existing scale and character. Exactly what that's going to be will be addressed when we do the standards next year. So in connectivity and mobility, we just clarified that we want to improve connections not only to other areas, but also within Old Town. And got a little specific there, for example, by adding sidewalks and missing non-motorized improvements, so bike lanes and sidewalks. And then in 2.9, increase the availability of parking spaces in Old Town, specifically by reducing the abusive use of free parking, which I talked about earlier, and then adding sorry, my words are not here, adding limited parking as well, limited parking. So either through meters or just people who come by and mark your tires, that kind of thing. For environment, whoops, that's supposed to be crossed out. Instead of we just said use limited. Building heights as opposed to step backs, which would potentially mean lowering heights, because right now you can go up to 4 stories with step backs. We talked about that earlier. So once you can go up to 3 stories, and then once you get to 4, you have to move it back 10 feet or 15 feet, whatever it may be, to help preserve views. And this is saying, actually, instead of using step backs, just lower the building heights altogether. And then the other one, we just broadened it out instead of the green necklace to an integrated park system. Economic vitality, we removed the 4.3 regarding the expansion of fiber infrastructure. And then 4.4, there was has to do with formula businesses. So we talked about that. The administration did not have a formal recommendation, but based on things that we've heard, based on conversations that you all had, and it's kind of going in 2 different directions on limiting the uses or limiting or requiring character and styles, that we're now leaning to, our recommendation is to just lean the way of, let's control the character of Old Town. Let's regulate the character and design of Old Town and see what happens that way. So retain and enhance the vitality of the historic shopping core of the city through zoning code updates and prioritize small-scale local businesses, neighborhoods serving retail, grocery, and restaurant uses, and 2, the conservation of larger auto-oriented commercial spaces into Main Street compatible developments, so that they would look like the rest of Main Street. Any questions? And then we also added 4.10 to facilitate community events and block parties. Housing, and the goal, we clarified that we will add a minimal number of housing units to Old Town. And, well, we won't add, we will allow the addition of minimal housing units. And then deleted 5.2, which allowed for various types of housing, which was kind of a duplicate of one below it, and replaced it with reduce allowable heights in higher density areas to maintain the character and scale of residential neighborhoods. So that would be in the multifamily high and the single family duplex areas. And we talked about that on our tour. And then 5.3 is the duplicate that talks about allowing different types of housing. But we removed micro-housing and cottage housing as options in Old Town, with the idea that those would create more density than the minimal density we want to allow. The action program for 2019 to 2020, which is our short term next year, we added 3. One is to develop incentives that reduce parking requirements for neighborhood-oriented commercial projects. We added code revisions to expand the sidewalk use district, which is what I talked about a few minutes ago. And we added adjust Old Town boundaries as adopted, which we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Okay. And for the short term, 2021 to 2022, said create streamlined city process to allow Old Town street closures to facilitate neighborhood and community events. Okay, so for the words, for the text, the policies, the goals, the vision, and the action program, that's what we have. Any thoughts or comments before we move on?
Got a couple of questions.
Oh, go ahead.
And I was actually going to wait till we were done with the packet to ask them, but I'll go ahead and ask them now. Going back to section 2.9 and related to section 4, number 15, parking, talks about develop incentives that reduce parking requirements for neighborhood-oriented commercial projects. Why are we incentivizing people to have less parking? Why don't we make it a part of code? And then two, where are people going to park if they want to shop in Old Town?
You mean if we reduce parking? Well, right now, it would only be reduced for the private property owners who redevelop their properties. And part of that is they're and Keith, you may need to jump in here, but part of that is that the property owners are finding it difficult to develop their properties with the current requirements that we have, so we need to update those.
So we tried a different tact than the formula-based businesses, because I think, there's a sense that I think we had based on your guys' deliberations, as well as the letter we got from the chamber and the one from the EVC that said, hey, take longer, think about this. So what we did is we said, well, okay, we kind of teed up the formula-based business conversation in response to some public comments we got about Dollar Tree going in, right? And so as that conversation unfolded, it became less about Dollar Tree and more about a conversation that the retail on Front Street is doing two things. It's in one way, it's serving, you've got the restaurants that are serving tourists and tourist destination type businesses, but you also have businesses that are serving the neighborhoods that are part of Old Town. And so what this is talking about is if somebody were to come in, let's say that the teriyaki place goes out, right? And a retailer wants to come in and and we heard this last time, someone talked about when they moved here, there was a dress shop on Front Street. Not to say that we're going to get a dress shop, but let's assume there was something small scale like that was really geared towards the surrounding neighborhood. If they wanted to go in there, but maybe there was a problem because there wasn't enough parking for code or some other reason, what this is saying is we should look for ways to prioritize neighborhood serving retail. If it is neighborhood serving, in theory, they're not trying to get people to come there from the rest of the city that are driving, right? So the parking issue is a function of what's being proposed there. Now, this is, again, we're teeing this up as an idea to potentially, so the problem with incentives is we don't have a lot in our toolbox. I don't have, subsidies that the city can offer to get a retailer on Front Street. But if you could say, you know what, we're going to not require you to provide any parking because the 2 or 3 spaces are part of the general public parking that's in the vicinity, and we're going to be fine with that. It's a policy decision that then gets turned into a code decision. But this is where we have that conversation of, is that the right thing to do? Or do we just let the market handle Front Street and whatever comes, and we'll hope that it's good stuff? And so this is that conversation point where do we do something to try and maybe bend the curve a little bit if it needs to be bent? So I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm saying it's here for a conversation. And this is the way this works, is you guys tell us whether you think that's a good idea or not.
Okay. I've got a couple more comments about it, but I can hold off on my comments until other people can talk about
Thank
this.
you for giving that more thorough explanation, because I wasn't connecting the dots between having something that was neighborhood-oriented and parking requirements. I generally think that is a good connection. I would be interested how it would be codified and what would be defined as neighborhood-oriented. which,
have a definition.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, we would have to have that conversation, but I think in general, one of the complaints is we've lost the grocery store. We want to make sure that if that was, in order to incentivize that coming back, I think reducing parking requirements makes a lot of sense.
And if you include that in the plan, then that's a conversation that can be had, because that's part of the vision that says, this is what we want to get to, so.
What are the current parking requirements?
Oh, my gosh.
They vary.
They do. In the CBD, it's different than the rest of the city.
It's
but
lower.
but it's a little bit lower in the rest of the city, and if you have a certain amount of square footage, like
So it's
three.
not as low as Central.
It's not as low as Central,
Right.
but it's not as high as the rest of the city.
Right.
Somewhere in the middle.
All right.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. You guys ready to
Okay.
move on to boundary?
Are you done?
Not, well, I just want to, with that stuff, I just want to talk about the boundary real quick.
So do you, clarification, do you want to talk about the boundaries now or wait till after the open house?
It's up to you all. That's just one of the questions for tonight, is to talk about the boundary.
Okay, do you understand the question? We open up the public hearing to discuss their thoughts and then talk about the rezoning, the change in the, the
But-
rezoning in the southern end.
Yeah, and if we can only open it one time, then we want to present the options for
We're going to
the boundaries as
continue
well.
the,
Okay.
let's do it right. We're going to continue the public hearing. So do you want to continue the public hearing and then discuss it? Yes?
I would prefer to hear the community first.
Okay. So,
But do we want to hear the community
we
before they've
want
been
you
presented
to,
the boundary?
I would like to hear your thoughts on why and what the value and changing that particular piece of property.
Okay, so I will
And then we'll
let,
have the,
okay, so I will let you know that after June 21st, we sent out about 150 letters to all the property owners within the northern area that's been discussed and the southern area that's been discussed, just to let them know that changes were being proposed. Nothing's happened, but that there was a public hearing tonight. I heard from 4 residents about it. Right now, so there are 4 options. And I'm not really going to speak to this southern portion of it right now. But as to the northern portion, the city is leaning towards not including that area in Old Town. Reason being, after the Old Route 10 destination retail discussions, the standards that we are winding up with there are still closer to central Issaquah than they are to Old Town, where we are talking about potentially reducing building heights there and not really increasing the densities that much. So they're going in opposite directions. So the city right now is not leaning towards adding the northern portion to it. But that's the city's stance. But there are still 4 options. One is option A, which is to just leave it as it is and don't touch the boundaries. Option B is to take what exists now and add Old Route 10. Option C is to remove the southern portion of what's there now and add Old Route 10. And option D is to not add Old Route 10, but take out the southern portion. They're kind of spelled out up there. But when I talk to people, I will let you know, when I talk to people, questions came up, and we put it up on the website eventually, but questions came up like, can I still vote if we're taken out of the Old Town sub-area? And yes, you're still in Issaquah, you can still vote. Does it change our school district boundaries? No, it does not change school district boundaries. Does it change budgeting for capital improvements in our area? No, because capital improvements are not determined by sub-areas. Am I going to be rezoned? No, there's no proposal to do that. I did tell them that there have been discussions that haven't really come to fruition yet, but discussions about potentially expanding design standards to include all of Old Town, but that nothing's been decided. And, so if they were to remain in Old Town, that might happen, but if they're outside of Old Town, then if that happens, it wouldn't apply to them. So those are some of the conversations that I've had with people, just to let you know.
so when we talked the last time, you were going to actually do some contacting people in the area to get a better, clear idea of what they felt? I know you had some questions, but did you go and do any other?
We did not go out and do any door-to-door things, but we did send out the letters to people.
Okay,
And let them know.
okay.
And the letters included maps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before our last meeting, or is this in
No,
addition?
it was on the 21st. I think the letters went out on the 28th. Thank you. The letters went out on the 28th.
Okay, so after our meeting,
Yes.
additional letters?
You
went
all
out.
requested it on the 21st, and we did it the following week.
Okay.
So, okay.
Okay, so we have 4 options to consider.
Mm-hmm.
And with that,
With that, I am done. So,
not that I don't want you to be done, it's a very good presentation. I'm going to continue the public hearing and ask if there is anybody here that would like to comment on where we're going with the Old Town area. Would anybody like to comment? Please come to the microphone.
Oh, I forgot to do a sign-up sheet. I bet you know these people.
Good evening. My name's Chris Craven. I live at 580 Front Street. I did receive the one-page, one-map notice from the 28th, and so I'm here tonight to comment. I have to say, I probably have more questions than comments. There's no explanation, no link to the studies or the reason or any of the background information that you may have. I know I was here at the beginning of this process, commented about the desire to change the northern boundary from its existing location to south of the bridge. And for the same reason, I have concerns about removing the southern section in that design standards allow us to create neighborhoods that have character. Front Street from north to south is a gateway into Old Town. And my fear is without being in that sub-area that it just continues to degrade in its character, in its upgrades, and in its standards. Again, I have a lot of questions. What's the advantage of taking the southern portion out of the subplan? What's the purpose of that? What does it mean to be taken out of the subplan? What other standards or overlays are applicable once we get taken out of the Old Town designation? There's a lot of residents in that area, and the connection on the Rainier Trail to this area is important, and the character and the overall, fitting in with the neighborhood is important. So all those connections, I think, are an important reason to give a very good, sound reason why it's being proposed to be taken out, and I don't know what that is.
Thank you.
Hi there. I'm speaking for Bowman's Candies, designation of which, if we're on that map, or which map we're on, because we did not get the flyer. We're at 255 Northeast Gilman Boulevard. But we saw some of you a couple weeks ago here where we decided about the destination retail land uses. And we aren't sure if, again, I may be out of turn, maybe somebody can correct me here, but if we are in one of these different boundaries, we liked what we came up with, which the PPC agreed with on June 28th. And we're hoping, whether we change into Old Town or back into Central or whatever, that the standards that were agreed upon by your commission will stay with whatever area you put us in. We heard something about maybe like mixed use or something like that. That's great if the standards are more, but we would like the minimum for our end of Gilman Boulevard to be what the commission decided last on the 28th of June. So again, I'm not even sure if we're in this. I just wanted to make sure if we are, that our voices are heard from what was decided on the 28th. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to make a comment?
Hi, Steve Pereira, Old Town, about 10 years. So I'm doing my best to be here. I'm coming in late, so is this topic just the boundary section, or are there other topics as well?
It's very difficult to hear you.
I'm sorry. So as I said, I'm trying my best to be here for all of these. I'm running a little bit late. I'm not sure if the topic is just the boundaries at this point or if it's broader comments. Okay. So I guess starting with the boundary, I guess I'd start with the idea of the process being not adequate. The old Route 10 was looked at as an old neighborhood. That still needs to be looked at from a broader community vision, needs to happen. I think that's true of removing the southern portions as well. There are people that consider themselves part of Old Town, and if we're not looking at it, can or should there be a different vision for Old Town or for area as far as zoning and all that? Maybe there should be, and that should be part of the discussion and the vision that the city has as a whole. That discussion hasn't happened yet, and it should happen. Should it be 3 stories, 5 stories, whatever that is, that discussion needs to happen. As far as the boundary, and I don't know the streets, there's that along the old Route 10 where it hooks up with, drives down, narrows down to 1 lane. There's some modern buildings back in there, the office buildings. That's being proposed to be in Old Town, yet that, for the same reason that it doesn't seem like that really fits the scale and character of Old Town, so I'm not sure why that's being considered part of Old Town. Maybe that should be looked at as zoning for something different. I don't have the answer yet, but it just doesn't seem that's part of what we're saying is the Old Town. I would hate to see different standards to accommodate them being proposed for Route 10 neighborhoods that shouldn't have that look and feel just to accommodate them. Overall, on the design standards, it seems more we're still approaching it from the perspective of what the developers want as far as height and density and all that. We need to go back and look, what does the neighborhood and what do the communities want, not what can we accommodate from the business standpoint. I still think that there's a proposal to, or desire to, the current standards don't meet, but I don't think that even the reduced to 3 stories and increased pervious surfaces meet the design standards, the requirements of what Old Town was required or suggested that it be. Developers have had a long time to make development. They haven't, unless we limit Old Town to what it is and should be, that's out of character with what the people of Issaquah have said they want Old Town to be. If all we're doing is increasing the density, increasing the pervious surface, and increasing the parking requirements, all we're doing is expanding the Central Issaquah plan to include Old Town. That's not what Old Town has ever been about. So please keep that in mind and vote accordingly. And lastly, I'm going to phrase this wrong, the chain stores, or can you have different businesses, like let's say a Starbucks or a franchise business in areas? I think you've opened up the whole of the Central Issaquah plan where you have lots of chances in areas that those can thrive. I think if you don't limit franchise stores, even if you keep the building standards and height, you're going to change the character of it. You've got lots of room and lots of places that you've opened up for development. For franchise businesses to go, you're losing the character of the neighborhood. It seems like an example would be, you used to have a grocery store that used to be down there, and now it's going to be a different business. Yet if you limited franchise stores, maybe it would have been a grocery store again, with the Red Apple Market having been there and located. So I think now is a chance to, an opportunity to retain that charm and character. I think if you tried to change something was designed, it seems like a bait and switch, and if you try to do that in Tallis or the Highlands, they would be up in arms. Old Town doesn't have that same homeowners association to fight for it, and I think a lot of people have given up. So I guess I'm looking for you to retain something that's going to be lost if you increase the height and the density and the pervious surface requirements. Thank you.
Anybody else like to make a comment? Before I close the public hearing, I received a email from the chamber that updates their position. It should have gone to Trish to forward to the committee here, but I got it like 5 o'clock this evening, so I'd like to read it into the minutes, since they're not here to read it themselves. So the Greater Issaquah Chamber would like to clarify a position regarding formula businesses. The new changes in the Old Town Plan still addresses formula businesses. However, we believe what the core issue and solution should be to create clear guidelines and standards that will identify the look and feel desired for Old Town. The enforcement of guidelines regarding design will be essential to the economic vitality. An energetic look and feel will ensure Old Town's prosperity. Limiting the types of businesses will not bring about the desired redevelopment and visioning we need in Old Town. A great example would be in Leavenworth. The Starbucks looks great, and it is a tremendous asset to both the community and surrounding businesses. So unless there is some other comment from the community, I'm going to close the public hearing at 7:05 and open it up for discussion. There are several issues that have to be discussed tonight. One of them being the boundary that is up on the screen. Before we do that, I know that there's reasons for doing this, and as a member of the community has questions, I think we should answer those questions before we get, they're valid questions, and so I think everybody should know what they are.
So I'm going to address some of these, but I'm going to allow the commission to address some as well, because it was the commission's discussion.
Right.
So I'm going to address some of it, and I wrote them all down, but so the questions were the advantages, purpose, which those two I think you all could probably address. What does it mean? I could do. Overlays and zoning, and then connections and, oops, I don't have my glasses. Oh, fitting in with neighborhood, which I believe was more of a statement than a question. But you all can still address that as well. Does that work? Oh, and I do want to clarify too that BOEMS is in there. You should have received the letter. We used the same one that we did for the retail for the rezones. So if it didn't make it directly to you, I apologize, but it was sent to you all. But BOEMS is included in both B and C up here, because it is very hard to see. I apologize, but it's up there. So as for what does it mean, I'm going to start with going outside of Old Town. If this area is taken out of Old Town, it would either become part of another sub-area, or it would become its own sub-area, and that would be decided during the comprehensive plan process, which starts next month, I believe, even maybe this month. Actually, the sub-areas would be a discussion later in the fall. But that would become part of the comprehensive plan process. As for the zoning and the standards, those don't change. All the standards that apply now to any redevelopment in that area would continue to apply to this area. That doesn't change at all. There are no overlays here, so there's nothing additional that would happen right there. As I mentioned earlier, it doesn't change school boundaries. It doesn't affect voting rights. It doesn't affect city budget and any capital improvements that might happen in this area, because that's not determined by sub-area. So as far as the questions that have come up so far from the public, that's all that's come up and all that I can think of. If you all have any others that you can think of, the people might
So
be concerned about.
the one thing, sorry, I tried to be loud. So the one thing that is to keep in mind is, so this plan has a lot of action items in terms of, changing building heights, adding potentially design guidelines for single family. So as you think about this and how it would apply to areas, keep in mind that there are some things that may not be in place today that would become part of this sub-area and that would be adopted later. And so just because there's maybe no design guidelines on single family now, that is one of the recommendations that if it gets carried through and adopted by the city council, that would be a follow-up action item for us, which would then apply to an area that at this time does not have design guidelines. And so for someone who may want more city oversight, being part of this sub-area has its advantages because there's a level of detail that's in this area that's not in this area, for example. For someone like Bohm's, who I think have asked for them to be less regulated, there's some disadvantages potentially about being in Central or Old Town versus not being in Old Town. So as you think about the boundaries and how it impacts property owners, there's definitely advantages and disadvantages, but different property owners may see certain things as advantages where others might see them as disadvantages.
But today, if whether Bohm's is in or out, as an example, they wouldn't see any design change, they wouldn't see any code change.
If they're in, then if there are design guidelines that would apply then to the mixed-use area, that would affect Bohm's. So right now, mixed use, what we were calling a destination retail. Let's just today assume that ball lands on mixed use as far as its name. If that happens, if that area gets incorporated into Old Town, then it could very well be that we decide that the same design standards for the CBD should apply to the mixed use area as well. We could, we may not. But we were basically regulating everything else design-wise in Old Town. And so I would pose to you guys, well, shouldn't there be some design guidelines for the mixed-use area as well, if it's in Old Town, since the rest of the whole sub-area is being regulated in design? So, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, when I was speaking of being out only, and Keith started talking about being in, and, the same thing applies not only to Old Route 10, but if you're the southern portion, and I mentioned this earlier, that there's been talk of potentially expanding single-family and duplex design standards. And if those areas to the south are left in, they also could have design standards applied to those areas as well. I don't know, it hasn't happened yet, and we're going to talk about the standards next year, but that's a potential. So I think we've covered advantages. What does it mean? Overlays, zoning. The connections won't change. The parks, we didn't have a new parks plan, or we're about to have a new parks plan, and connections are huge. That's a citywide thing, again, not a sub-area thing. So those connections are not affected by anything that might happen here. And fitting in with the neighborhood, again, would be addressed by design standards if that's something that they stay in and they want to see happen, then that would be a discussion next year. So as for purpose, I'm going to let you all address that.
I just want to be clear, and I'm having a hard time to be clear. Can we go back to the map? And when you're discussing ins and outs, could you specifically show it on the map? I know you had those 4 designs, but sometimes it's not quite clear. Better.
So the 2 areas that I'm talking about are, this is the southern portion, which has been discussed as being removed. And this is the northern portion, which is the old Route 10 destination retail mixed-use area that has been discussed as potentially being added.
Okay, so there are 2 decisions to be made.
2 decisions to be made.
That's all I wanted to
Okay.
clarify, that there are 2 decisions tonight, which areas you want in or out.
And as far as the purpose and the reason that this came up, I think thinking through the history of PPC, one of the things that happened when we were looking at the Central Issaquah plan was that the old Route 10 area was in that. And we looked at that and went, well, Central Issaquah is about creating more businesses, mixed use, increased density, adding. Do we want to be adding to this area? So it was PPC's recommendation that that particular area not be included in the Central Issaquah plan. Well, when you take something out of a sub-area, you have to designate a sub-area. And so when the next thing that we were talking about was the Old Town sub-area, the idea came up to include that in there as PPC discussed whether or not it fit the same general feeling as Old Town. And then once we opened up the boundary idea, it was also, well, does the southern portion fit the requirements that we're going to have there? And so that was kind of why I think this came up for us, just to clarify.
So with the northern portion, it sounds like in addition to deciding if we add it to Old Town, we need a second option, either or, where we either add it to Old Town or we make it its own.
No. Your decision tonight is whether to add it to Old Town or not. And that's
Okay,
it.
if it doesn't get added to Old Town, where does it go? 'Cause
We
it's
figured
out
that out.
of
We
the
figured that
central-
out in the fall with the comprehensive plan amendments because we have to redo that sub-area map.
Which was the same
Anyway,
thing
we have to-
did
we have
with
to redo it
Central
anyway.
Issaquah plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the past weeks, some of the questions I've asked was about architectural standards. And my understanding was that if we remove the southern portion of the Old Town from the Old Town sub-area plan, that there are no architectural standards today that would regulate those developments if someone came in and decided to develop, which are different than the design standards that you're talking about, Keith.
Right.
Or is architectural standards and design standards the same?
No, we have two separate things. So we have the Old Town design standards, and the Old Town design standards are very specific, and they apply to the cultural and business district and to part of, to part of East Sunset Way. That's all that they apply to. So everything else in the rest of Old Town falls under the Issaquah Municipal Code, the IMC, and Chapter 18, the Land Use Code. And we have something in there called green sheets that talk about architectural standards, but they're pretty vague, pretty general. And that's what applies to the rest of it. So if that area, nothing in the design standards applies currently to the south or to the north, and if those came out, the exact same standards that apply today would apply then.
So one of our public here had a concern about how it may change her neighborhood if she is pulled out of the Old Town. And the answer is, there would be no change, right?
Correct.
So if a developer came in today to develop a piece of land, whether you are in the Old Town or not, the building could still
Architectural standards.
Right.
look the same.
Right,
We'll get there, Keith.
right.
So today, no
So today.
changes, but later, considering it seems like the direction of, are the architectural standards, or at least the discussion is going to happen about whether or not we want to apply it more broadly.
Right. If it is taken out, no. Today or tomorrow, there would be no changes if it's taken out. Tomorrow, if it's left in, today, the standards would be the same. At the beginning of the next year, the standards may be different because standards that apply currently in parts of Old Town may apply to all of Old Town.
So let me put it this way, Ron. So if you lived there and you were concerned about your neighbor's house and how it looks, I would want to be in Old Town and not in Old Town. Not that it changes today, but what at least is coming potentially is the application of a higher design in architecture for that area that's in the brown than what's there today. So if I want more regulations in aesthetics in my neighborhood, I would want to be in Old Town because where this is all pointed is to add more requirements than what's there today. If I didn't want that, I would not want to be in Old Town. There could still be a sub-area conversation to the south, I think this is Sycamore, where we could add design guidelines to that at some point in the future, but there is no conversation about that now. So I think that's the difference.
How about height requirements? Because it sounds like we're having a conversation about how Old Town wants buildings to have lower height requirements.
Right.
So if that does end up being adopted, those areas down there would be quote-unquote protected from big buildings coming in as their next door neighbors.
If we decided, and if you all, the council decided to expand those design standards, then yes, that could happen.
So how does, I understand the school district has their own plan. Is it affected in any way, in or out? It's the,
No.
Okay,
It's
so
still
they
in
can-
Issaquah, and it still falls within the Issaquah School District. It does not. This is simply for city purposes to more easily identify neighborhoods or areas of the city. So it's just for our
You mean the
purposes.
design of schools?
No, I'm just talking about the lines. The lines that are drawn don't
So-
affect school boundaries. They don't affect those, it's just for our purposes.
So the building heights are a function of zoning. And school district, remember we went through the compact schools, CFF changed the standards. That applies,
Yeah.
okay, regardless. The zoning that's at the south end of Old Town, I don't know what that zoning is, I'll be candid. We've talked about reducing heights in the CBD and in the multifamily.
And that's multifamily high.
Okay.
That's multifamily high.
So we've talked about pulling those down to a maximum of 3 stories. So that would, if that's what that zone, that would affect that area if it stays in Old Town.
I want to just take it up a level and ask a question, and because I'm new to the PPC, I just want to make sure I understand. What is the point of the sub-areas overall? And I don't know if this is for my fellow commissioners or for city staff, but is it to direct and congregate similar land use and architectural review and different things like that? Or is it to actually create actual community feeling within these different sub-areas? I'm trying to understand kind of what the original genesis of breaking up our city into these was, because that will help me better understand kind of what we're trying to do here. So anyone want to take a crack at that?
Because the city is so large and it's so different, we tried to parcel it out so that it's easier to talk about different areas based on some of the attributes that they have. Obviously, Old Town started out as the original grid, so it was the certain architecture, the small scale, the grid system, and then different areas that came in either were a sub-area because they annexed that way or because they had a certain attributes so that you could talk about them. Like the Sycamore neighborhood is pretty much the whole Sycamore neighborhood. But as things have shifted, like when Central was invented, we sort of handpicked parts of other sub-areas to create sort of this new place where we would have job density and more housing density. So we had to sort of shift the other sub-areas around it. And so this is sort of what we're doing, as Lindsay mentioned, with taking something out of Central. It started sort of a ripple effect of, well, now we're doing Old Town, let's look at that boundary, because maybe there's a ripple effect that we want to moosh those boundaries a little bit as well. But the only, Central is the only sub-area that actually had different zoning within it, so that's what is causing us to rethink the zoning for those parcels taken out. For Old Town to be in and out at this moment does not change your zoning like it did for Central, so that's a little bit different of the ripple effect, why that's the Old Town part is different than the Central Plan part.
Thank you.
Does that help at all?
It does, but it sounds like there's a high likelihood in the near future that the zoning might change in this sub-area as well.
Right,
Okay.
right, by design, because you all have asked for that as part of the plan, the
Right.
Old Town Plan update.
Right, well, not that the zoning would change, but that the development standards would
right.
The
change.
development
Right.
standards, okay. And then specifically, I just want to make sure we're really clear on the rationale for pulling out the southern portion. What are the top 2 reasons for doing that?
I'm going to let your commission answer that.
Okay, perfect.
I would say look and feel and like density and grid. So if you're looking at the top portion There's more of a grid effect and more of a feeling of housing close by. I think the other thing we discussed was what is the entry point to that old town feel? And as we were looking at the northern portion of, do we add that area in there in order to kind of create this, you're now entering Old Town, can we put a sign, you know, all of that? It was, well, where would we put the sign on the south end? And does that make sense down or at that kind of intersection there?
So think of the word Old Town and what it denotes in your mind. Do you think big open spaces with big schools and other kinds of facilities like that? Or is it the main section with the downtown and the small homes and the, and that's kind of what, to me, Old Town means. So if somebody said, do you live in Old Town, and I live down at the southern end, I would not feel like I was in Old Town, but that's just me. I don't think it looks the same. It doesn't feel the same. Doesn't give me the Old Town feel. So if that kind of helps a little bit.
No, that's helpful. So it sounds like it was created from the perspective of a planning perspective of how do we arrange and organize the city in an appropriate way. And I'm hearing comments around from, you know, our community and neighbors saying, well, what, you know, I haven't had a say or I want to say, or, and so I guess I'm also wondering, was there any involvement with the different sub-area residents in describing that, or was, again, the intention was more from a planning perspective and how we organize and do things as we manage growth and develop standards across the city, and not so much creating unique sub-neighborhood community feels for our city? I'm trying to make that distinction and understand if that was meant to be part of this or not.
I'm pretty sure that the city sent out letters and got the information out to everybody, but just as everybody else is busy, they don't pay attention till they get a final thing that says we're going to do this, even though they've had the opportunity to come in to talk to the city, which is always open to hear what they have to say. So, you know, how long do you wait to make a decision? And you take what you have and then look at the reasonable effect of the area. I mean, that's all you can do, and hope you made the right decision.
And I will say, you know, I think this process started in 2016, which was the first open house. And then we had one or two more open houses after that. And we've had public hearings here, and then it went to city council, and there were discussions there. They remanded it back to us, and we have had more public hearings here. And back in the first round, there was a comment about changing the boundaries, or a couple of comments that came up about changing the boundaries, but it didn't really catch traction until the second time around, and that's when we sent out the letters.
Right.
And then also on the northern portion, one of our discussions was when that came up as a potential boundary was, well, wait, we're not hearing from the business owners up there. Please, please, please get them involved. And the city staff did a great job there. Long email chain, lots of discussions happening. And so I felt like that portion of the outreach really worked out.
And I must say that the city is open to doing that same outreach to any main changes. And that's why we're here. I mean, that's our function.
Yeah, and I think I might have been misunderstood slightly. I didn't mean in this particular, have we reached out to the community? I just meant the origination of the sub-areas. Was there the thought, you know, there's other large cities that think about their sub-areas as kind of niche little communities within the city. That was my question of just if that was part of the thinking or not. And I'm not looking for, I'm just looking for clarity if when you guys originally, because I wasn't here, were thinking that way, or again, if it was just merely from aggregating things so that you could put things in place from a planning and design standard.
I think Trish was saying that a lot of the sub-areas came about when there was annexations and things like that. So the idea of segmenting the city into sub-areas has been around for a long time, right?
Right.
Okay, so this isn't a new
No.
idea.
Yeah. Okay. So there's never, I mean, I'm looking at the map right now of every, year that different sub-areas were put into place. I'm purposely making this distinction because I think in the community, there's some fear around, am I not part of the character of Old Town anymore? And so I'm backing into the point of, I don't think this exercise is meant to do that, but I could see in the way that it might be perceived that it might feel that way. And then on top of it, while we're saying let's take this out, we're not really saying where the southern half in particular is going to go or the northern half. So I'm just saying if I were a resident receiving the letter, I might say, okay, where am I going though? What's happening to me? So I think there's just some additional color that we might need to provide.
And unfortunately, some of that can't be answered right now.
Right, exactly. And that, that's true. And, you said 150 letters?
But it was about 150.
Yeah, and 4 responses. So, we, to the point of involvement, yes, I think the point is made. But I do think there's space for us to make sure that we kind of educate where do I go next? What does this mean? And just by the comments you brought up, obviously, people are concerned about everything from can I vote to does this change the school district and things like that. Okay, that's all.
People have to realize that they are still part of the community of Issaquah. They're not being thrown away and into a new city and any new changes. It's just a matter of making sure that the city has every type of opportunity for people to come into and enjoy, and then have it all connected. So if we could take these, we're not going to vote on it, but if we could take and get try the northern part and just have a discussion on the northern part. Are we comfortable in or out? This is, Jamie, do you have taking the northern part and the discussions that we've had with the business owners in the city, are you comfortable with putting it into Old Town or not?
I'm not comfortable because per my understanding of communication that was sent after the last PPC meeting, it sounds like the zoning and the things that we talked about are not in play right now. So I'm having trouble, how can we make a decision on where it goes when we're not really sure what we're doing there either? So I'm having a really hard time understanding the order of which we should make these decisions. And
I'm of the same opinion. It seems like we keep going down the route of make sure you base your decision on what a future design might look like a year from now. In my mind, changing the boundaries has no value right now. Why don't we pair that decision with when we have a design option to actually look at? Right now, no one's telling me what the design proposal is for southern or the northern. I don't see any value in removing them if we don't, we're making a decision off, incomplete facts in my mind.
I think to speak to both of your,
One more.
No, it's fine. I can go after his comments.
Okay.
I'm just going to recap. Okay. So to both of your points, Jamie, and we had made the decision to remove the south because we felt we were under the impression it was an intrinsic value. So by changing the boundary, there is not going to be any detriment to the design standards of that area. But learning tonight that there may be future looking, if we make design changes or design standard changes or architectural changes to Old Town, it would then apply to those properties in the south. But when we made the decision, we didn't have that information at the time. So that's why we decided to, because it was only a intrinsic value, but there were no other reasons why we decided to remove it, other than the fact that the school district takes up a majority of that, and it's already a non-conforming standard in that area. So that's why we did.
So Joan, do you want to talk about north or south right now?
I wanted to stay with north.
Okay, fantastic. I'll go back to north. My goal with the north is to make sure that they are not included in an area that is going to inherently encourage redevelopment or densification of those areas. And that is the reason that I would recommend including the northern portion into central Issaquah, where I feel like directionality-wise, we're going to get a little bit more protections there, which I think are important. And I think that was our original idea of why that area does not belong in central Issaquah. So that, my general feeling is that it does belong. And I think there was some really good conversations with the businesses that got to their concerns that staff then addressed, which we then agreed with, and now it's coming up again, and that we agreed with. So,
Well, I just want to make it clear that we are just an advisory body to the council, and they can change whatever we do. So they did have some questions, at least the mayor did, on our, in regard to the future and what we had planned for that area. I think talking to the businesses, we came up with a good plan of where it should be today, but they were concerned that we didn't have a picture in our mind of what that area was going to look like. When they first started the central, working on the central area plan, that was part of it, and it was set up to be the 50s, you know, foams and things that kind of like Leavenworth, only a little different, if that makes sense. But it didn't fit in central area because of the zoning that's in central area. So we either put it into Old Town, or we create a whole new subset. And I don't know if it's wise to create such a small area as a specific subset. It just sort of flows into Old Town to me, and I think that it's something that I would like to see put into Old Town. It's just kind of the way I feel. I know that we had some people come in at the last open forum here that believed that that area and the southern area should be. Southern area out, that area in. So I'm just going to go by what I feel. I think that it's a good fit, and I hope that we can, and if we don't put it in now, I think we should have some other discussion on what we believe the future should look like, and then go back to the agreement that we made with the business owners there, and see if we can satisfy the council and make sure that the business owners have the ability to grow and provide us services. And so,
So, Joan, I think you get kind of at the point, which is what has changed since the last meeting that PPC had. And I know you and I have both talked to Mayor Pauley.
Yeah.
And understand that concept, but that hasn't been presented to PPC. It wasn't in any of this meeting. So, and I know maybe that wasn't supposed to come up at this point, but if we're talking about it again without the new information, you know, are we addressing the concerns that the administration has presented? Are we asking the right questions, which is PPC's role? And it feels like we're not.
Okay, Keith is probably going to get up here in just a second, but I think no matter what the zoning is, if it's destination retail or mixed use or whatever it may be, it is still going to be more dense than what Old Town is being proposed to be. So whatever that final decision on the zoning is, it's probably going to be more than Old Town. So we don't know exactly what it is yet. and that's going to be decided later after this discussion. You know, you all have talked about it, and you've said maybe we just don't talk about it at all now. We don't change the sub-areas and wait until we know what the design standards are, and that's an option, is to just, you know what, let's just postpone, let's just keep the boundaries the way they are until we know what's going to happen with the zoning and the standards and everything else. I don't know that that answered your question, but
I think that was a great call. In my opinion, is what are we basing the decision on tonight to even talk about? If we don't know what new proposed standards are, how do we make an educated decision on whether it's in or out?
Well, we know what the proposed standards are. We just don't know if, that we like and the business community likes. We can either go with that, or we can, which could be what the council finally decides on, as long as it can be incorporated into a futuristic plan. Which could be, I mean, if you read what the chamber said about essential to, guidelines essential to the development, the economic development of the city, I mean, that could fit into it. So we can either agree to put it in, or we can look at the rest of the issues that we have to look at tonight and approve them with the assumption that more discussion needs to be done on that particular facet. I think we need to approve something to get this started. I don't want to wait 6, 7, 8 more months to start something to develop the Old Town sub-area. This is one of my pet peeves. I've been pushing this for, I don't know, for as long as I've been on the council to have something done. And when you look at downtown, the Old Town area, it looks the same as it did 30 years ago when I moved in. There's no changes, and sometimes we need to update. And some of the things that were proposed in the plan are really good if they come to fruition. So I'd like to get on with at least that part. So if we can't agree on in or out, I mean, I could take a straw vote on whether you want it in or not, or if you have more questions, we can do it that way. Or we can just table it.
So didn't we have a straw vote at the last meeting? Or like the idea that we were moving toward a direction of that being included, and then this came back to us. I'm having a hard time with this because I know that there are questions that the administration would like us to delve into, and yet those are not being discussed.
I don't think those are questions to be delved into tonight, though.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything I'm sitting here thinking of right now that, oh, I wish they'd talk about that. I don't, they may
Maybe a
agree with me.
difference between
but, yeah.
administration and the
I mean,
mayor?
It's kind of here at face value. It's,
Okay, then I would say nothing has changed since the last time we talked about this and kind of had that decision point. And so-
Actually, there was something, and that was the future potential of putting design and architectural standards to the south.
Yes, and for the discussion of the north, I don't feel like that is as much of our concern. Maybe it is, but I'm not getting that sense. On the south, I'll agree with you, and I think we have to have that conversation also.
But for the north portion, if we decide to put it into Old Town, those standards have to be redeveloped anyways because they are not the same code. They don't have the same standards as Old Town,
well,
right?
not
So
necessarily.
It would have to be created on its own. So if we left it out, it still has to be created. It may become its own sub-area, which may be more appropriate, but it sounds like the whole north section still needs to be baked, and you guys need to come up and tell us.
Well, you all, the development standards are being discussed. That was what happened on the 28th, and that's what is still continuing right now. And those are how the property develops. What it looks like is what the design standards for Old Town are and could be expanded to that area. Does that make sense?
That's another conversation.
It is. And
Yeah.
that would be a conversation. if you all decided to pull Old Route 10, or if Old Route 10 winds up in Old Town, and next year we start our design standards conversation about what standards need to be where, what needs to be regulated, standards on what the buildings will look like could move up into the Old Route 10 area. But as far as what the development standards are, and impervious surface and stormwater and heights, that's being determined now. It's a moving target, but it's being determined now.
So the reality is, the decision we should be making is, if we decide to leave the south in, assuming that's kind of where I feel like that's the feedback I'm getting, may or may not
Talk about
be
the
right.
south later, because I have thoughts on the south.
Okay,
The north.
so if we make a decision today to move forward with the original Old Town blueprint, the north still has to be baked.
As far as what it's going to
Gonna
look
come back
like,
to it.
yes.
There's still going to be coming back to us for discussion.
Not necessarily. I mean, our position is to advise the council of what, after taking community input and discussion, what we feel and look at of what it should be. They can always change it. I don't think we can look at, questions coming up in the future. I think we have to look at, is it reasonable to put it into Old Town? Does it fit? Does it fit? And I need a consensus from you before we move to the southern part.
As far as the northern part, are we talking about like the old oil can Henrys?
We're talking about Old
No.
Route 10.
Okay.
So it does include Oil Can Henrys and Triple X and The Grange and Bohm's, and then some office properties further to the east, a motorcycle place.
I-90
It's north and,
Motorsports
it's
and
primarily north and south of East Gilman, east of Front Street, with a little bit to the west.
So I feel like, and tell me if I'm wrong, I feel like we're all in agreement on the dream 20 years out is that is that Old Town includes the north. I'm jumping north and south a little bit, but includes the north, doesn't include the south. I mean, I get that 20-year vision, and I think that's part of our purview and what we're trying to. And to your point, Joan, you've been here for decades, and you feel like Old Town
Ages and ages.
ages, right? And you say Old Town, you feel like it's not changing at all. And so I totally get that. And so this is the vision of how do we cordon it off in a way that we feel like is representative of what Old Town is. And I think that's what we're trying to do. Where I feel like the consternation is and the confusion is coming is, how do we get from now to there? And it sounds like there's some real teeth that are getting decided on now, which is clearly why we had business owners, showing up in our previous meetings, and we have residents showing up related to the southern portion. And if I were a resident or a business owner in either section, I would have encouraged more of my neighbors to come, because I would have some consternation on getting voted in or out and not knowing what comes with that. And that's where I feel like it seems very murky from my just observation. And so that's where I think it's not clear on what are we doing, what are we supposed to be doing, what is the right order of things, and
So if we put it in, the development standards will be the same, but as Kristen said, the design standard, which will make it look and feel like Old Town, will be in there. So the design
Maybe.
standards, maybe? We gotta have some decision on something.
Well, no, I'm saying, we can't say right now that if we change the boundaries, that affects their design, because that conversation hasn't happened yet.
Well, as of right now, if they, unless I'm wrong, if they are in Old Town and the design standards are applied to all of Old Town, then they fall under the same guidelines, unless something happens or some.
Yeah, but it was that if that I was talking about?
Right.
But, there could be an earthquake tomorrow and it could all go away. I mean, right now, as we're planning this, I'm just trying to come up to a decision with you people.
I think there's confusion, design standards and architectural standards. So we're looking at the north, and we're thinking that we want it to look like part of the old town, right? But it's not, that's not what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about design standard. Well,
No.
So just,
hang on. There are two conversations that are parallel. There's a architectural standard that doesn't exist yet, and there's a design standard. The design standard,
Standard.
so there's, you're talking about kind of three different things, which Lindsay just brought in, but there's the development standard, height, impervious, stormwater, all that kind of stuff, amount of parking. Then there are the design standards, which are also architectural standards, because if you look at the Old Town design standards, it talks about what the windows have to look like, where the doors have to be, what the signs are going to be, where the materials are. That gets into what it's going to look like, some more of the architectural standards. And that's what doesn't apply to Old Route 10.
So tonight, the only thing that matters is the development standards, or the only thing that's certain is the development standards. And then potentially in the future, there might be design standard changes that could maybe apply to all of Old Town, maybe.
Correct.
And if there are standards for Old Town, don't you want them to continue down to the rest of the area? So our input would be to continue the Old Town standards into this area.
So if we move north into Old Town tonight, will they immediately adopt the Old Town development standards?
No,
No.
no.
Okay, what's that process look like?
That would take place in next year when we start talking, we have existing design standards and we need to amend this.
Development standards.
Development standards.
Oh, development
Setbacks,
standards.
impervious, all that. Those are, they're
those
very
apply-
different between what is like destination retail that we talked about the last meeting and Old Town.
No, the development standards will apply whether it is in or whether it is out. And those actually haven't been adopted yet. Those would be effective once council finally took action on that and made a decision.
Okay, so nothing changes tonight whether we add it or remove it.
Correct.
Okay, and Joan, you mentioned, one second, Joan, you mentioned that we're holding something up by not making a decision on adding it or removing it. What is being held up?
I'm
But the parking
assuming
standards
that
only
it's going to
apply to CBD.
delay acceptance by the city council for the Old Town sub-area vision that we're looking at.
Okay.
And that's all, I would like to move it along, and instead of 2019 and 20, it could be 20 and 21 if we continue on. Do you, there's a couple of things we have to decide tonight, so that's only one of them. We have another 6 or 7 to decide on, so is it the consensus that we put it into Old Town?
I'd like to hear what they're talking about.
Oh, special
Before-
sidelines here.
So we were
Yeah.
talking about, say, and Trish could be part of this conversation too, about, and I wish I had the design standards with me. Keith was being cautious of being quite so absolute, particularly about the parking standards. And as I recall, the parking standards, there are parking standards for CBD.
Yeah.
And there are parking standards for the multifamily on East Sunset Way. But there are not parking standards for the rest of Old Town. Well, yeah. There are so you have your
Right,
multifamily
in
zones and your
18.
CBD zone, but
Right.
but my thought is they wouldn't apply if they came into Old Town. But I should say we should double check that
Right.
and let you know. Yeah.
From my perspective, I'd just like to know what each zone section or section of Issaquah, what those design and development standards are that we want to get past, so we know how it affects other areas. Like, I don't have any of that information to even say if it makes sense to add in the north section.
Okay.
So we had this whole conversation with the business owners about what they liked and didn't liked about destination retail and what they would want in their development standards. And so that conversation has been had and is continuing. But it sounds like the intention is to have that conversation influence whatever multifamily designation is given to that area. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, did we just move south?
Nope.
Because you brought up
Nope.
multifamily.
No, sorry, mixed use. Blah, blah,
Okay,
blah.
okay, mixed use, sorry. You threw me off there.
I know.
Okay, so now you're gonna have to say it again. 'cause-
Okay, fantastic. So with the business owners, there's been this conversation about what they liked about destination retail, what they would want in mixed use or whatever that new designation was.
Right.
I am assuming that that conversation, as it continues, is still going to affect whatever development standards are assigned to that area, and that's whether or not it's in this Old Town sub-area.
Yes. Well,
So I'll share my understanding, which may or may not be consistent with what you guys heard. So part of, I think, the anxiety about just moving destination retail out of central Issaquah and retaining the name destination retail is there's nothing in the code that preserves those uses as is, as destination retail. They could all be redeveloped into apartment buildings. And so we could end up with an area called destination retail that has no destination retail. So I think that was the crux of the issue. So it's a title issue, not a substance issue, in my mind, because the standards, what we talked about in terms of building heights and impervious and setbacks, those, I believe, are going to move forward to council. Now, whether council adopts those or dials them back, that's a whole conversation that none of us have had and been privy to, because we haven't been there yet. Some of the conversation about the building heights and the impervious proposals that are for the area that we might call mixed use seem out of scale with where we're going with CBD, which is the adjacent zone within Old Town. So that's, I think, the issue of why there's been some maybe less confidence in the administration saying we think this northern area should be part of Old Town. Sam Kyle's not here. He's in, I think, Alaska at the moment. His preference is not to be part of Old Town. I think he sees, as the conversation we had with the southern piece, there is this idea that Old Town has more regulations than not in Old Town. And so I think from his perspective, which he would like less regulations, he would rather not be in Old Town. I think we heard from Tyson earlier, you know, they want to get what they talked through with us in terms of coming out of central Issaquah. I think because we haven't decided to add additional design regulations or architectural regulations to this area, if it was brought into Old Town, it's hard to know what the outcome will be. I think part of what you guys need to, I think about is you could do this in a number of ways. We could wait for the council to make a decision on the area that used to be destination retail. That might be 3 or 4 months, which puts this into the icebox again. We could say, you know what, let's leave the boundaries the way they are, but let's make a decision to revisit it next year after some of these other decisions are made. And at that time, you could have another conversation about moving the north end or the south end. Or you can make the decision to take them out now. So that's what I can share. I'm not sure that added any clarity to any of this, but that's where I think we got into some fuzziness on the north end. The south end is a different story, I think.
Keith, what happens when this plan, whenever it is approved, what happens when it's approved? What if we don't approve it, what are we holding up? If we approve it, what then gets set in motion? Joan, you know, you're saying, let's get going with this, let's approve it. What do we get to look forward to when it's approved?
So all the action items at the back,
Yeah.
those don't happen.
Okay.
So, you know, changing zones, getting the transfer of development rights out of Old Town, Right now, it's shown as a receiving site, so if I was a property owner and I wanted to take advantage of the transfer development rights program, I could do that and add density. So a lot of the things that we've talked about for the last 2 years just stay on hold. And to Joan's point, the momentum and the inertia in this neighborhood is fairly low. We don't see a lot of development activity all the time. Otherwise, I think there'd be a higher level of sensitivity to let's get this done. But we need to get it done. Staff need to move on to other things.
We could do that today, right, and just have it apply to what is considered Old Town today, which is everything within the black.
Yep, you could.
All this could be approved tonight, applying to what is currently Old Town.
You could do that.
The question is, why do we have to make a decision on removing or adding sections to make what is considered Old Town today move forward?
So to rephrase your question, does a boundary change have to be part of the update? No. You don't have to change the boundaries as part of the update. You could say the existing Old Town boundary is Old Town, and we don't want to change the boundary. Or, you know what, there was enough ambiguity about the boundary. Here's the 5 things we want you as staff to do, and then bring it back to us for another conversation maybe in 19 or 20. You know, we don't have to wait. This was 96, like 20 years? 99?
Yeah.
Like 20 years?
It's a 20-year plan.
So this was like 20 years since it got updated last.
Hopefully we'll dust it off sooner this time.
What I was saying is, you guys could basically, you could make a recommendation, leave the boundaries the same, but within the next 2 to 3 years, come back, let's revisit the boundaries after some of these other pieces have hit the ground. And maybe before we do that, you know, let's go through a bigger community outreach conversation about those boundary changes or those potential boundary changes.
Problem with that
Yes.
is that the business owners that are in the northern section are in limbo.
They have surety for the next 3 years, which Sam Kyle said, you've changed the zoning on me 6 times since I've owned this property, and he says, I don't want it to happen any more times. So I get that. I get the surety of making a decision and saying we're done. I was just offering choices.
I don't mind waiting, and I think probably that's what I think most of these commissioners want to do, but I don't want to say 2 or 3 years. I want to say 1 or 2 months or whatever, however you can get, how quickly the approval is done on the stuff that we did, the development standards, if that's what you need to know, or what the future's going to look like, or if the standards, I mean, you can make a decision now, can't you, that if the standards that are going to be created for Old Town, or that have been created, will apply to any future development that is on Route 10. I mean, can you make those decisions so that we can make a final decision, whether it's in or out, within a reasonable amount of time?
So the answer about building heights and setbacks and impervious for the old Route 10 area should be done by October-ish.
And they apply whether the area is in or out, right?
Those would apply whether it's in or out.
So there is, okay, so you've answered my question that it doesn't have to be decided quickly because they will have decided. I know you have your hand up, but I closed the public meeting, so we'll see how this works out. And I've lost my train of, we don't have to hurry to just make that decision if the development standards are decided. Because I think the businesses there have a right to know and be consistent with the future and what's going to happen to them.
So, you know, that's a hard question to answer. What I would say is there would be a lot of predictability for them as property owners. The city can always come back and change parking requirements or tree requirements or other things. Those things happen all the time, right?
All the time.
We tinker with codes. The thing that if I was one of those property owners, what I might be concerned about is, you know, what we've done in the rest of Old Town is we've adopted architectural standards. And we're talking about expanding that regulation to residential. And so, okay, maybe at some point the city's talking about, if we've included this area in Old Town, maybe the city's talking about adding that to the mixed-use area. Okay, well, now that means that my building and my door need to be a certain color, where today I could choose whatever color I want. That's the difference, is it's more frosting.
They still can have a door.
They can still have a door. It's more frosting than it is bones. Not bones, bones, right? Sorry.
So, a question for you guys. My thought process was always, we pulled the old Route 10 area out of central Issaquah because it didn't belong there. And we were going to have to decide at some point where it goes. What is the timeline for that? Is there a deadline?
No.
No, that's what he just
So
answered.
it can just float?
Yeah, it can be,
Okay.
it can be its own sub-area if it needs to, the old Route 10 sub-area or something.
I'm getting the sense that if we're not ready to make a decision on the north because there's too much ambiguity, but we can make a decision on the Old Town boundary south. If we left it as is, and we don't have to do it at community outreach, there's no harm done, and whatever needs to get done can get done and moving forward. And we can come back and revisit the north section and decide if we want to put that in or not, say in a year from now, and it gives you time, and we can still move forward. Otherwise, we're going to keep holding this thing up until we finally have a fully baked cake, and we don't need to do that. We can actually maybe move forward, make progress incrementally, right?
Okay, so the decision basically is to leave it out for the present moment. Okay, is that,
Decision is to leave the boundary as is, both on the north and the south, right?
we're talking about the north. I just want,
Talked about the south.
I know.
Suggesting.
I'm looking
at just leave the whole thing as is. Why even have the
And
conversation?
that could be a 3-second conversation, but I just want to know that.
On the north.
On the
yes.
north, so it's to, at this present time, to leave it out of Old Town. Is that the consensus that I'm getting?
I dislike the idea, but I agree with the thought process, so that's fine.
Okay, so now, if I look at the same thought process for the south, it's a completely different area, completely different concept, different layout of the land, completely different. And as you go down Front Street, you go down quite a ways to get to the school and that area. Are you comfortable with leaving it in and considering it part of Old Town? Is that a good concept? You want to leave it in?
I am, because I'm thinking forward, who's to say if we adopt these new design standards, that the south section, which I would agree looks a little bit different, obviously, than when you're driving down, we'll consider downtown, like, Jack's around that area, what is still in option A. Will that southern part start to look more like what we consider option C if we adopt new stringent design standards? So looking forward, are we interested as a community in making what we consider Old Town larger, look and feel wise? Or are we based the decision off what it looks like today?
So are we comfortable with limiting to 2 or 3-story buildings, or is that the area that gives you the opportunity to build density in that particular area? So once you start building density, you're out of Old Town. So do you want to restrict it to small growth, basically? Or do you want to use that area?
Yes.
Yes?
I want to restrict it because of traffic.
Same here.
I agree, I
Yeah.
actually live down there, so.
Okay, so I'm sensing that you all want to leave it into Old Town. Okay. Now, what else do we have to decide tonight that you guys, you read the plan?
I think we should have a recommendation on a timeline for the north section to be decided. Not leave it hanging. Make the decision tonight to go with one of the options. And if that northern section isn't in that option, we put a recommendation that it needs to get addressed more quickly than later.
You can put that in as in your motion to either accept or reject whatever we're looking at right now. So you can add that to the motion to, but let's go back right now to the rest of the plan. Was there anything in the sub-area Old Town plan that you found problematic, that you wanted to change, to increase? Was the plan, my only thing is I want it done now, and a lot of it is visionary. And so I'm hoping that when staff has lots of time to put in all the codes and restrictions, that they do a good job and all those things are accomplished. I don't find anything in there offensive or, you know, couldn't find anything that I wanted to add to the plan.
I feel the same way.
I have
Okay.
a question for Keith.
Okay? No, go.
Okay. This is aspirational.
Yes.
I want it to be disruptive to the whole organization.
And you do that very well.
Yes.
We are proud of you for doing it.
Okay, so aspirationally, I just got this great idea, and I want to share it with the people here and kind of get an idea of what they think. If we eliminated parking on Front Street, moved the sidewalks to the street, and opened up all that space to shop owners to use for outdoor cafes, and we move the parking towards the back of the buildings, and the city acquires maybe some of that property, we put it in parking structure. In terms of vitality, I think that would be a huge boon for Front Street business owners, because you would create almost a mall strip. And it would be, I think, very welcoming. So while we're on the topic of the Old Town Plan, I thought that would be a great aspiration to air and your feedback, while she's scratching her head going, I cannot believe you
I
just said-"
love the idea. I don't think it's at all feasible because of all of those requirements that you put in there of buying property and then shifting the parking behind when parking is already limited and
Traffic,
And-
where's traffic going to go?
There always has to be someone
Exit
that's
15.
And
disruptive.
the idea in this plan is to have it walkable. Are you going to walk between the benches and the chairs and the restaurants and whatever, or walk on the street?
yes, because that's already provided for in the idea of creating those little outdoor seating
Yeah,
areas.
Yeah, but if you take the sidewalks away,
I'm not saying take the sidewalks out. What I'm saying is use this parking that's on Front Street and turn that into part of the mall strip for pedestrian and for business owners to use as outdoor cafes.
So the city just executed a contract with Fair and Piers to do a downtown parking study. And part of it was in response to the Old Town Task Force recommendation to look to improve the capacity of the existing parking and opportunities. So that could be a lot of different things, and we'll just talk about that for a second. So you've got a certain number of parking stalls in Old Town now, right? And some of them are, as Kristen mentioned earlier, maybe being used all day by transit users, which basically takes 2 uses a day away. So someone who parks somewhere for 9 hours a day, that space would have normally been turned over at least 3 times in a normal parking situation. So part of what we're trying to do is say, how much capacity are we losing now? And if you did some different things like time limit parking, could you potentially add parking without adding parking? You know what I mean? By just making it more efficient. Part of this is also going to be looking at a garage, because one of our council members, who happens to be council president right now, has said more than once he thinks a garage downtown makes sense for him. So the parking study that's going now till I was going to say October, is looking at that and it's fully, broad scoped. And there will be a community outreach piece. So there will be an opportunity to float that idea to them to take a look at and consider as they look at the options. I like the idea. So from a business standpoint, our businesses would hate losing the parking out in front. I'll just say that now. From a streetscape standpoint, being able to widen the sidewalks, provide more opportunities for sidewalk use, that's super great in terms of enlivening the Front Street environment. But to Lindsay's point, it's a big lift to get there. So parking study, I think, is the opportunity to have that conversation and look at the results. So they'll actually do license plate studies to find out where the people live that are actually parking here, to see if they live locally or if they're commuting from other places. So there's a lot of data that comes out of, they actually have an app that they just run behind and app your license plates of all the people parking, and it's probably saying too much on TV. So we're going to get a lot of information. I think once we get that information, there'll be a better opportunity to talk about what choices are here for us to improve parking, which may or may not include removing some, maybe not all, but maybe some of the parking on Front Street to create some of those nodes that were part of the streetscape plan that already got presented to council.
So if you read the plan here, that can be addressed. Actually, it is addressed because it says to cut down parking, to add more people, opportunities to walk in the neighborhood. All of those things are in here. You're going to have to be very creative on how you get there. And that's kind of the problem. They're very up here, higher level. We will do this and we will create, fix the traffic on Front Street. Well, how do you do that? So you're going to have a lot of time and discussion on, maybe a bridge over top of the city. Who knows, what you're going to come up with. So that, that comes into it. That can be creative. That's thinking out of the box, and I think the city has to do that now to get some of this done. And you talked about you didn't want traffic, more people in the traffic. You're putting 7,500 homes already into the central area. The traffic is going to be tremendous, right now. So a lot of thinking out of the box has to come to fruition. So again, is there anything else in the plan that you would add, subtract, change? Jamie has her.
I do. I have two things. I love the plan. I love the vision of where it's going. There's just two contradictions that really jump out at me. And I've read this plan several times over the last month. And one is it's all around, walkability, bikeability, pedestrian friendly. And we're all touching on it. And yet we have the equivalent of a highway going through this district. And so it's really hard, to look at all these nice elements of it, and then when that piece is vague, and I know it's a big thing that we need to tackle, but that just really stands out to me, is if that doesn't get addressed, a lot of these things become irrelevant. And then the second contradiction piece that I just am concerned about is around housing affordability. So we've pointed out in the plan that we want to keep the current housing stock in this area. And in fact, the latest revision have us removing higher density homes like cottage houses and micro apartment units, which is fine. I just think we need to realize that we might inadvertently actually be making this place very expensive to live in. So Old Town could potentially become the most expensive sub-area in the city of Issaquah if we restrict the amount of housing units there. So those are just the two big things that jump out at me with my hat on, kind of just thinking longer term of this vision and what it could potentially create. So that's it.
I think part of your concerns are related to, I think one of the reasons that we don't want to add a lot of housing is because it affects the traffic in Old Town. And people have said they don't want more traffic in Old Town, so therefore don't allow too much housing. So the two are kind of related. I get
Completely, and fair enough,
yeah.
but again, it'll be
Yeah.
interesting once we actually start doing some of these transportation studies where the majority of that traffic is originating
Right.
and coming from, and I'd be surprised if the majority of it was intralocal traffic. But if I were living down there, I'd very much say, oh, please don't put another,
Right.
1,000 resident unit here, that's just going to add to it. But
Right.
I would argue in the details, if we could address longer term the bigger issue of our pass-through traffic, you actually could have a very vibrant pedestrian-friendly Front Street with high-density living on it with the appropriate public transport, walkability,
Right.
cyclability and things like that. But it's all very intertwined. But yes, to your point, I completely understand where people are feeling it is at right now.
And it is being addressed. It's being just addressed regionally. There's a group that talks
Yeah,
about it, and they're
yeah.
working on it. But that's a 15,
Yep.
it's a long time away and a lot of money away. So in the meantime, here, we can hopefully
Yeah.
address some smaller fixes that at least help the pedestrians to get around a little
Yeah.
easier
Yeah.
and safer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, 100, and I bike down from the Highlands and go through Front Street quite a bit, and thank goodness for that one blinking crosswalk across, Front Street there. That's the only way I can kind of safely cross on my bike. But to your point, yeah, I think there's things we can do in the near term. I just wanted to point out that I think on the traffic piece, there's the bigger thing that we need to address to really knock this out of the park. And then I do think we need to just be wary of our decisions and what that means to affordable housing and what this neighborhood will eventually start looking like then 10, 15 years from now.
So on the affordable housing piece, I think the plan actually does a good job of addressing the idea of we want to decrease tear downs that would cause, yes, additional housing, but what we've seen with the additional housing units that have gone in that have been multiple stories tall is they're not affordable.
Right.
They're not more affordable than what was torn down. And so the goal of increasing or maintaining some level of affordability there is more about keeping the existing housing stock and letting Central Issaquah maybe add the small units and dense housing that will add the numbers in that area. So that's my impression of how the plan addresses those things.
The
And that
housing-
makes sense. I just, from a reality standpoint, it's really, it's hard to put the teeth that says to a property owner, don't
tear this
Don't
down."
tear this down and rebuild something that's going to net you a greater profit. So
and-
that's just where I would then go to what are our teeth to prevent that
Well,
from
and
happening.
We do have the housing strategy in place, which addresses two of those things. And one is there's going to be an inventory of market rate housing, correct me if I'm wrong, that is actually affordable, that we would like to try and find a way to maintain that housing. And another one talks about limiting the number of tear downs to replace the bigger housing. And so those are both things that are kind of in play. I think they start next year, but they are part of the housing strategy that was adopted by council late in 2017. Yeah.
It's going to be really hard to oversee limiting the tear downs. I'm somebody who wants to make sure that the person who is invested in that property or in that business with the assumption of this is my retirement, that all of a sudden the city takes it away and changes it. And affordable or not, I think that we have to be reasonable in, we can't just say we're not going to do that, because those people have waited 20, 30 years. Now they're ready to retire, and this is their retirement. So
And assuming that those are code amendments, those come through you all as well, so you get a chance to discuss it then too.
the only comment I have on it, besides the fact that I want it done tomorrow, is I understand that a lot of this takes time and money, but there are a couple things in there that maybe the Arts Commission could be working on wayfinding and things that really update the community, or working with the business owners to put not umbrellas, but the
Overhangs, yeah.
overhangings on there, and cleaning up. I know that I've walked down Front Street a lot, and there are a couple buildings that need some basic upkeeping, and I think that would change the whole makeup of Issaquah if just those things were done, besides the let's fix traffic and let's do this. I think you have to start small and work on it. So call the Arts Commission, tell them to start working on it, and then it's in there, but
Okay.
And actually, to her point, I had wrote this down earlier and I just forgot to mention it. Utility, some of the utilities, for instance, like signals and crosswalk intersections and so on. I think this falls under traffic, but the village-style traffic signals in Old Town, right? So if we want to say that we want to limit all those types of utility functions to be village-style, the new crosswalks that are coming in are galvanized, and they look like they belong in an industrial section of town.
Okay.
So shouldn't those also be applicable to the village style? And
Well, that can be addressed, that can actually be done through the design standards. I mean, we'd work with PWE and with engineering and with operations to make sure that it works, but that would be something that we could address during the design standards when we have that discussion next year.
so we wouldn't add that language into this document?
Pardon me?
Would it be best to add that language into this document, or no?
You can certainly add it.
You mean into the action steps for next year?
Yeah, into the action items. I mean, it already says that we want to keep the scale and character, so that would fall into the character, in my opinion. But it's as a policy, and it's not necessarily as,
Well, I guess I
As
need
an
your
action item.
advice. How would we address that?
It seems since it'd be a capital project that the city would do, that it would be best in the action
Okay.
items.
It didn't include style for the benches and trees and. But not, no.
Because that's where it should be. Streetscape plan.
Well, we can,
Right.
Keith's suggestion is we can amend the streetscape plan
Okay.
as well.
And would that go in the action items, or action,
Yes,
whatever?
it would be amend the streetscape plan,
For consistency of
yeah.
utility poles.
All right.
any other questions, answers? Yes. With that, I'm going to ask someone to give me a motion to address what we've discussed tonight. Would somebody like to make that motion?
So I will make a motion that we adopt option A as is, so we leave the property boundaries as they are, and we ask that the city come back within 18 months, 12 months, 18 months, with a proposal on what to do with the northern section.
Can you clarify between 12 months and 18 months?
All right, so
What
we'll
about
make it
southern?
12, we'll make it 12 months.
No, go the other way. End of next year.
Okay, so we'll make it till the,
That's 18
And I would,
months.
and I would clarify too and say within 12 months of adoption of, development standards for that area. Because if that conversation happens to continue, and it won't, but if that conversation for any reason continues into March of next year and doesn't happen this year.
okay.
you
So-
amend
So
it?
I will make an amendment, then. It would be, we ask that the city reevaluate the northern section of our discussion to be discussed again to the PPC within 12 months of the approved Old Town Subarea plan.
Of the development standards for Old Route 10.
Correct.
Do we not, what about the south?
We're including the south.
Yeah, but do we not want to revisit that in 12 months? Or are we just assuming south is forever and?
We're assuming the south is for everyone. If you want, we can.
I think that will probably come up when the design standards conversation happens.
Whether people went in or out,
Yeah.
naturally? Yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, you can always suggest or include that if you
Two
want.
seem like they different, but would go together, because really we're waiting for the standards, right? So I'm just suggesting why not put the south in there too?
Well,
Is no one else
the
on with
north
that?
hinges on the development standards for Old Route 10, which are currently up in the running, whereas the south is more about the design standards, which is a conversation that's inevitably going to happen.
Okay, you're saying it'll happen regardless. Gotcha.
Okay.
A suggestion might be, right now in your action items for 2019 and 20, number 17 is adjust Old Town boundaries, comma, as adopted. You may say something like, relook at Old Town boundaries within 12 months of adoption. So it's actually in the plan and not just in the motion. Because then maybe we wouldn't forget. Not that we would ever forget.
Amend the plan to include
Brilliant.
that.
Review.
That's so streamlined.
Yeah,
It's
wait,
like,
that makes
it
too
was
much sense.
meant, yeah.
I don't know if
Where is that?
Wait, we have a
Well,
plan?
basically saying,
Because otherwise 17.
so on
It's
the
number
2019 to 2020, number 17, adjust Old Town boundaries and review whatever we're going to call the Old Route 10 areas, potential inclusion, what,
I was just leaving it open because who knows in 12 months what you're going to want to relook at.
Yeah.
You might want to look at the east.
So the problem with not mentioning that is if it's not adopted as part of Old Town, I want to make sure
It's
that
already
it
part of Old
goes
Town.
somewhere. No, but it wouldn't be.
No, right now it's part of Old Town.
No.
The north part is not.
Oh, I'm talking about south, okay.
Yeah.
We already got past north.
That's why I put the other map up there. It was too
That's why I was
difficult.
just leaving it
Sorry.
open.
The idea is that right now, we don't change the boundaries at all.
Agreed.
Right, because if the action says to relook at the boundaries, you could go in or out with anything in the boundary, is why I was leaving it general.
Yeah.
So I would suggest, although I can't, instead of having the city make a recommendation, because they're asking us to do it, in your motion, you say the city. I think we should just add, no decision until the development standards are settled, and then come back to the planning policy. This is our recommendation.
No decision, you mean we leave it as is?
That's your motion.
No, but I
Okay.
mean, clarify what you're saying is that if you were to make a motion, because you can't make a motion, but if you were to make a motion, your motion would be to have option A. We would be leaving the boundaries as they are.
I'm not saying that at all. That's your motion. In your motion, you said you were waiting you were asking the council to make a decision before it came back, the way I understood your motion. And I don't think we should make a motion to wait for the council to make a decision because they're looking to us to give them input, is all I'm saying. You can state the motion any way you want, but that's just a suggestion that I think it would be easier to approve the plan as is, keeping the outline exactly the way it is with the, whatever you want to put on it.
You want to withdraw your
Yeah,
motion?
so
I-
let's-
Well, there was no second, so.
Yeah, I just,
Okay.
before
So-
moving on.
Let's make a motion to use the boundary A option, or boundary option A. So we're leaving the boundaries as they are. And within 12 months of adoption, we come back and look at the old Route 10 as part of being in what boundary we want to put that area into.
Can I restate that for you?
Yes, please.
Okay. We're just changing the line of number 17 on that page to say PPC to review the Old Town boundaries within 12 months of development standard adoption, acceptance for Old Route 10 area, or whatever you're going to call it. I don't know if there's a name, since it's not in an old town, or it's not in a sub-area.
I know.
that
I'm
be
still
good
calling
enough?
it Old Route 10.
Yeah.
TBD.
Yep. So
The area north
does
of Old Town.
that make sense for
Right,
17?
and I would just make a friendly comment that it wouldn't just say PPC would review, it would be review, because it would be a process that definitely you would be part of the process, but it would be a community, you know, it would be more than just PPC
Okay.
reviewing.
Then we can strike
So I would
PPC.
start it with review.
So, yep.
That would be my suggestion.
Do I have a second?
Second?
You have a second?
No, I was restating his line.
Do you accept his
Yeah, do you
I
accept
accept.
that? That's what I was going to say
So you
first.
have a
And
second.
then second.
Any
Yep.
further discussion? Uh-oh. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And just to clarify, you're only revising, or you're only reviewing the northern part, you're being silent on the southern part.
Correct.
In that motion, that was it.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Good grief, that was
So,
painful.
to clarify, because we've had some questions, what we just voted for and
I would
adopted,
assume we have clarity since everyone just voted.
I'm just going to state it anyway, just for the record. We're keeping the boundaries as originally recommended with no changes, and we are adopting all of the Old Town sub-area plan with that one change.
Not recommended, but as they are today.
Correct. No change to boundary.
Correct.
I would-
Did we want to put any time frame on revisiting the plan itself? The overall plan, as opposed to 20 years from now? Or is that being too ambitious?
In the motion, you can make a motion
Would
to
you,
that effect.
would you guys like me to? Or are we not too concerned about that?
If you make the motion, you'll find out.
Okay. Well, I'll give it a shot.
I might suggest adding it to the longer-term actions.
Yes.
Yes.
It is
Brilliant.
Go, Lindsay.
2023 to 2030
Yes,
to
30
say,
years.
revisit the plan.
Okay. So I'd like to make a motion that the PPC, that we add to the longer-term actions, that the PPC review and revise the plan as necessary.
And like Tricia's comment before, I would remove PPC
Oh,
and just
sorry.
say review,
Review,
because it's a
yes.
community
Yes,
participation.
okay, got it.
And the time frame is?
Well, if we're just adding it to longer-term actions, it's 2023 to 2030.
Why are we waiting so long?
Well, it's only 11 years. It was 19 since the last one.
You could put it in the short term, but that would be up in 2012.
Yeah.
What?
No, that would
No,
be
2021. Now we're going backward.
Sorry, I'm in the,
But no,
I'm in the way back
it's just fair
machine,
enough that-
2022, I'm sorry.
So what year?
Okay, let's,
I thought we decided that we wanted to have the community and PPC review it 12 months after the approval of the design
oh,
standards.
so it's already in?
No, it
Oh.
wasn't part of the motion. So if you wanted to make a motion for what we decided, I would love to have you make a motion.
Okay. I'm going to go for shorter this time. I am making a motion to add to the short-term actions
So that would be
that the
13.
plan be reviewed and revised as necessary by, after
Design standards are,
after the design standards have been adopted, 12 months after that. Yeah, okay.
I'd like to second that motion.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. So with that,
Hopefully you wordsmith that appropriately.
I have
Always do.
Thank you.
review, this is what I got.
Okay.
Let me know if I got it.
Yes.
Review and update the
even-
Old Town Plan within 12 months after design standards have been adopted.
So that's like 2 years from now, and that gives the design standards about 1 year to see if they work. Does that work?
Well, it's in the
We can
short-term
still-
actions.
Yeah, I know.
look at it
Okay.
and see, and give you input and see what changes were made. It's been moved and seconded and
Until
voted
2022,
on, so.
2020.
than 12 months.
It is.
But it's in the short term, it's
That's not her motion, though. Her motion was 12 months.
12 months after adoption.
after the design standards have been adopted, though. So if they're not adopted till 2022, then we would have a year to do the, that's what I thought I heard you
Yes,
say.
That's it.
Keith, you got job security, don't worry about it.
I think the goal was just to maybe look at them like 3 to 4 years from now, not 10. Are we getting
Yeah.
to that? That was the goal. Okay.
Okay,
All right.
so move, okay.
Anything more for the good of the order? I
No.
see you have a concerned look on your face, like
I'm
we're-
just going to let it go. I'm just going to let it go. No, but I do. Okay, so I'm not going to let it go. So. She's been prodded. No, it's just that the Old Town Plan sets the vision. And the assumption is that right now, this is what you want the vision to be. And you want to give the design standards, once you adjust those in about a year, make sure that those are achieving the vision. They need a little time you need a little time to figure out if those standards are achieving that vision that you want before you go changing the vision again. So I'm not sure that it's the plan you want to check in 2 years, or if it's the design standards 2 years after that, and give the vision, 5 years. The policy's 5 years before you go changing the vision again, because you change the vision, you're probably going to have to change the standards again.
So just like the TIP and the CIP, you have a list of what you want to do.
Yep.
And every year they're changed. So if there is a
policies have-
problem, you put it down on the list or you change it. I mean, cities have the ability to do that.
Right?
But for right now, it seems like a reasonable assumption to come back and discuss it, even if it hasn't had a year to go through the process. I mean, there's still you still can discuss it and say, yeah, we think it's going to work. No, that doesn't seem reasonable. You can still have opinions on it. So.
Absolutely.
So I think that's all we're getting at.
Okay.
I mean, we have to close out this and move on, and I think that's a reasonable way of doing this.
Okay.
So,
But your concerns are heard.
Okay.
I get you.
Okay.
So.
Can't keep changing. Okay.
I understand that there's only so much time in the day and in the week of being able to process all of this stuff. I understand all that.
Well, but I think the point is also, you're saying whatever metrics we're measuring this by will not have necessarily come to fruition
Exactly.
in that time frame.
Exactly.
Totally
It just needs time
yes.
my point was it
Yeah.
needs time to settle, to
Yeah.
see if what your vision is and what you're doing to get there really
Right.
works.
So if we're
before
not
you go back and
seeing what we
readjust
think
the
we want to
vision.
see when we talk about it again in 3 years, it doesn't mean we should necessarily deviate.
Right.
It's just, we might not have given it enough time to play out yet.
Correct.
And that's
Correct.
the
Yeah, it's not about
consternation.
staff time,
Yeah.
it's just about letting
And
things
I
Fair
can
enough.
see you
Yeah.
coming back and, it was on the agenda for January 2080, but we're going to move it because of this, this, and this to 2090, kind of. Yeah, I understand that. So let's,
2080.
Yeah, you're giving us a lot of credit for still being around here at that point.
Non-PPC.
Yeah.
Okay, then.
we'll see.
All right.
Okay, so is there anything else besides this plan? Trish, you usually have an update of what's going to happen.
There's a new public hearing, so you guys are all done with this Old Town
Yes,
Plan?
all done.
Hurrah, hurrah. On August 9th, is that right? August 9th?
Yes, August 9th.
August 9th, there's a new public hearing And I'm letting you know now to make sure that we have a quorum.
I won't be here.
So no Joan, okay?
I will.
Okay, so Ron is a yes, Joan is a no.
I'm a yes.
No. Lindsay's a yes? I hear a whisper, okay. Lindsay?
Yes.
Yes, excellent. Bill?
Jamie?
Yes.
Jamie, excellent. Jason, do you think?
Yes.
Excellent. It will be an exciting one, but it's a change. It's one that's just coming down the path, so I wanted to get it on your, because it's not even on your schedule in your packet this week. So that's how new it is. So I just wanted to get it on your radar.
So you want to find out if we're coming before you tell us what it
Yeah,
is?
right.
No, I just want to be sure before we send out a million.
Come regardless, Ron?
No, before we
Exactly.
send out a million letters to property owners, I want to be sure that the
Oh,
seats are
great.
full up
A
here.
million people.
Yes, yes, we're going to open up the doors, there'll be so
vacation.
many people here.
It
But I just
sounds like
wanted to
it's
be
gonna
sure
be really
before any
good.
letters went out
This is a
that,
transportation element?
no, that's getting bumped. The comp
That's
plan
getting-
it continues to be bumped
Okay.
with all this other exciting projects that we're doing. Now, this would be the permitted land use table of the central standards. The storage units and hotel discussion
I'll watch
got
it.
more exciting, yes.
I'll watch it.
Fantastic.
I'm sure we'll have lots of people show up.
I know I wouldn't miss it.
Yeah.
And you better not.
I better not miss it, yes, yes, indeed. But that's all I have.
Okay, anything else? So with that, I'll close the meeting at 8:45.
Well done, and thank you for your first meeting. Well done.
Thank you.